Hey everybody, we are officially live. I'm so excited to dive into another pre-symposium panel as we lead up to our executive symposium tomorrow, October 17th in Houston, Texas, on the topic, how to maximize our team's potential. So you might be watching this, you might be learning more about these three great leaders on our panel today, and you might be thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I would love to meet these three great leaders. I want to go to an executive symposium. Well, you can. Come to Houston. It's going to happen at Artist Bond. It's a really cool art gallery in near the Galleria in Houston, Texas. And what we're here to talk about is how to maximize our team's potential. So we've got three great leaders who are going to be at the symposium tomorrow discussing their thoughts on the topic, on this amazing topic. So I will have all of our panelists introduce themselves first before we dive into the topic. Cara, do you mind going first?
Hi, everyone. I'm Cara Pelecky, and I'm the CIO for American Bureau of Shipping. My background is in the energy industry, though I've had a lot of experiences building new teams and on this exact topic we're talking about today.
Very cool. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Ben Johnson. I'm a serial entrepreneur, usually in the technical co-founder seat, and I own a company called Particle 41, and we offer fractional CTO services as well as full service software development, data science, and DevOps.
And Emory, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Emory Skolkin, and I lead people initiatives for a subsidiary of IKEA. We do the 3D spatial mapping and AI for augmented reality, so you can see what furniture looks like in your own home.
Very cool.
Very excited to be here.
Awesome. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality. And when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways we build community is we have these executive symposiums where we discuss different leadership challenges and topics that we are all going through. So onto the topic, how to maximize our team's potential. I want to define what it means to maximize their team's potential. When I say how to maximize their team's potential, I mean, how are we effectively harnessing the strengths of our employees to put them in the best position to continuously improve? Now, continuous improvement might mean one of a variety of things. It could mean the company's going through a reorganization. And so what was a profitable business unit before may not be a profitable business unit anymore. Maybe we determine that this person's skill sets are obsolete. We know technology changes really quickly, and what was a really needed asset and skill set 10 years ago may not be as needed anymore. And how do we go about repurposing them? And really also, how do we go about having our middle managers provide an opportunity to continuously provide proactive career development for our people? So when I say how to maximize our team's potential, that's what I mean by that is how do we keep proactively thinking about what is the next step for our people and instead of being reactive to what's going on. I see a lot of what's going on in the economic landscape right now. There's a lot of companies doing layoffs. There's a lot of companies making transitions and changes, and it's hard. And so I'd love to kick off this panel with just one early question, which is, if you have to transition an employee out of necessity, i.e. the business unit isn't profitable or reorg is happening, what have you found to be effective as it pertains to helping an employee transition roles within your organization? Who wants to go first?
I have some thoughts. First of all, yes, to everything that you said, right? And I think, you know, I come from Microsoft, the HR rotation program, and coming to Geomagical Labs, the subsidiary of IKEA, we're really tasked with a different type. And I think the thing that I learned from Microsoft is that it's so important to have a manager direct relationship that's trusting and you build on their strengths. But in order to do that, you have to get to know people. And I think building that sense of trust and having those one-on-one relationships, which Garrett, obviously you're very familiar with, the Ambition in Motion, and I'm sure everybody on this call understands. I think in order to transition them, it starts with getting to know them, because you can't have a one-size-fits-all program there, would be my take on it.
And an additional thought about it as well is, you mentioned in this question, if you have this one-time moment or a singular example where you're having to transition someone from one role to another. And I think one thing to do is to just make that less scary, make that type of transition a part of your culture, make regular transitions like rotational roles a part of a natural thing that's happening. And it will make all of your people more capable. They get to try new things, et cetera. And it will make those, when they are not necessarily done by choice, less, they'll be more palatable, and less surprising when you make those types of role changes on the regular.
Yeah, I think we encourage all of our folks to want to understand technology at large. I think of teammates that have transitioned from one programming language to another. And we really support that. And we kind of see that as a natural progression of a software development career, because you are going to end up having exposure to multiple languages. And so many of the things that they've learned at one job, like how to engage with a client, how to plan projects, how to run, they're learning soft skills and hard skills all at the same time. And so a lot of these transitions just support the evolution of that.
Can I ask a question, Ben?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, when you're transitioning somebody like that, and I think awesome looking at transferable skills and how that's going to apply in the future. And when you look back, what are the things that have separated somebody who, really crushes it in that next role versus the times when you're like, you know what, this didn't really work out? Do any patterns jump out at you?
Yeah, one of the competencies that we look for, and we do it in performance reviews, is the self-training, or their self-motivation towards picking up, like all of our employees get Udemy licenses, like so full access to Udemy. And we'll take a peek at, like, hey, did they take any training to learn this new skill? And we create paths for them in Udemy so that they can go do that self-learning. So applying yourself to self-learning, and then also applying yourself to certifications that are more broadly applicable. Like we definitely bonus and incentivize around AWS certifications and things that are likely to really support them in any client engagement and make them more well-rounded and more T-shaped.
Mm. Y'all giving me a lot to think about, and I'm really intrigued and excited to dive down some of these paths here. So, Ben, you talk about self-learning and that all of your people have Udemy licenses, which I think is great. And Cara, you talk about how do you make the transition less scary. And Emory, you're talking about how to get to know them a little bit better. And, all these things do kind of come together in this interesting kind of dichotomy of the simplest way I put it was how do we help employees think about their careers entrepreneurially? And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but it's it's really interesting. I don't know. I think back to, I don't know if you remember, like the worker strikes from a couple weeks ago, and it was so fascinating. Like one of the biggest complaints that they had was like no innovation whatsoever, no automation, no like improvement, because that's going to take jobs away. And it's like when you think about it, well, it's like shoot, you got these giant cranes that are taking these giant boxes off of these ships that are putting them on the shipyard so then people can take goods and whatever things out of those ships. And you think to yourself, well, gosh, if we didn't have any automation or technology, what are we going to get, like 50 people to lift the giant box off of a ship and put it onto a shipyard and like take it, be able to do the work themselves? Like automation can be a good thing, but it can be hard when it looks like, oh my gosh, this task that I've been doing that's been very manual up to this point is becoming obsolete. And so, Ben, on that notion of how do we inspire that self-learning, how do we get people to feel motivated to utilize that Udemy license? Like, how do we get people to embrace the change? Because sometimes I've seen some leaders where they'll go to a team member and they'll say, like, hey, Lily, there's a new role that we're about to open up. I think you'd be a perfect fit for that. Here's what it looks like. Here's what the opportunity looks like. Lily takes some time to think about it. She gets back to the boss, says, hey, you know what? I love the opportunity, but I think I'm going to stick here in this role. And then the boss has to come back and say, hey, actually, we're removing this role. This role is not going to exist in the next 6 weeks. So it's either this or it's nothing. So
Yeah. Well,
how do
so I
you go
think
about, keeping that entrepreneurial
at
spirit? And yeah.
yeah, at the heart of that, so I'm heavily influenced by Chad Fowler's Passionate Programmer, that really talks about your technical journey as an entrepreneur. So that's a great piece of work. I think in my practical daily practice, there has been this, the word that comes up sometimes in my mind is capability versus capacity. And so if I look at people in a set of capabilities, then that's a cop out for me as a leader, because I can just say, well, they know these things, and so they're not capable of knowing these other things, and I'll limit them. Also understanding that they could have that internal vocabulary too of well, I've been doing this for years, that may mean that I'm not capable of doing these new things going forward. And so we put some work together, some internal work together around, it's all about capacity, not capability. So that capacity can be expanded through leaving your comfort zone, going into the growth zone, being willing to learn those new things, and that you're really in charge of that. Like, you can take responsibility for your capacity. It's difficult to take responsibility for your capability. It's more of a limiting word. And so just really talking to them about that, like, you're capable of learning new things. We have the tools here for you. We will even incentivize you to finish the course or get the certification. And so we want to partner with you in that, and we want to create the time for you to do those things. And yes, there are some people that want to hold on to that capability limiting belief, and that's unfortunate. But I think the more true idea is that they are capable, and they just need have some time to really lean into that capacity.
So Benjamin, I think you've got all the right suggestions there, and I would only add that as when someone is doing self-development, right? I think it matters where their energy is coming from. If it's coming from a place of paranoia, like fear of the future, it doesn't get you to the same place as if it's coming from opportunities of the future. And so I think a part of getting people to their full capability or capacity, whatever, and making those teams successful is getting them out of the paranoia driver, right?
That's great.
And
That's great.
it really changes the momentum, and with that, and it changes the level of stress on themselves and on others, right? What is driving you here? Is it paranoia? That just doesn't feel as good. It feels better when you have a different driver.
I love the call out between capability, capacity. It feels empowering just to tell people, hey, this is the thing. You might not even know about it, but those are two different things. And we as a company kind of have a stance on how we're going to approach your self-learning and how we're going to empower you to become better. It reminds me of Google's Project Oxygen, in which Laszlo Bock and his team of people operations folks looked at the manager relationship. And they kind of had the question, are managers essential? Do we need managers? Like, because of that paranoia, the micromanagement that was happening, Cara, I think, at Google. And I love that study. They came up with 8 different things that a good manager does at Google. And I think that sense of empowerment was a theme with all of those 8, types of encouraging dialogue between you and your direct report.
So Cara, you bring up this concept of the paranoia driver, and Emory, you compared it to micromanagement. But I don't know, the thing that comes in my mind is like psychological safety and security. Like, how much do I trust my company? How much do I trust my boss? Because, if we're at a large organization and our boss is a middle manager, there's only so much control that they have over the entire situation. There's only so much semblance of trust and confidence I can have in whatever they say. If they come to me and, sometimes they put on that toxic positivity of like, everything's going to be amazing, everything's good. Like, toxic positivity is absolutely a thing. A lot of leaders are guilty of it when things are tough, and like a manager's trying to calm everybody down by saying, oh no, everything's good, your job is safe. And then all of a sudden the company says mass layoffs, everyone's getting shellacked. It makes you wonder, like, okay, how can we go about actually trusting what our boss has to say. And how do you go about actually building that trust beyond toxic positivity? Because well, that will work until somebody above you contradicts everything you've said. So how do you go about building that trust with your people, knowing that you've got a boss that could totally contradict what you're saying, or a board that could totally contradict what you're saying, and force you to change in a way that you had not expected?
I've experienced that challenge many, many, many times, right? One company I worked for had a great rotation program where I was, and each of us were leaders of different teams at least every 18 months, like sometimes that even faster, right? So imagine having a different team every 18 months and you don't necessarily have experience in that part of technology. So everything is new about it to you. The people are new about it to you as well. And they've had a different leader every 18 months, et cetera. So sometimes you'd come into these teams and they are feeling quite ready, quite acceptant of that type of change. And they're ready for you to take them from X to Y, right? Other times they had or had a feeling of we'll see the next leader in 18 months. I don't really need to do any of those types of things. But it was always about building trust, like you said, right? And some keys to doing that were by far listening. Right? In every case, these are good people, smart people who know what they're doing. You do not know more than them, right? You're there to just knock out the roadblocks, right? And like you said, you maybe can't knock out every roadblock, but you can knock out roadblocks within your control, right? Don't overcommit. Don't try to knock out a roadblock that's outside of your control. You'll lose trust that way. Stay within your lane and knock out those roadblocks. Listen, exposure, spend time with those folks, and that's that time and exposure will get that to that trust level.
Can I ask a real quick follow-up question on that card? Because and Emory and Ben, I want to learn your thoughts on this, because and it's going to sound like a silly or really simple question, but when you say listen, what do you mean? Because and I know that sounds like such a silly thing, because I think when we say, oh, you should just listen to them, I think we think that sounds obvious. I don't think it's as obvious as we make it seem, because it's not just the act of listening. If my body language isn't communicating that I'm listening, if I don't reiterate that I've heard what you're saying and I'm repeating it back to you, I may have listened to you, but if my body language isn't communicating that I'm listening to you, it might as well have been that I didn't listen to you, because ultimately that's what I've communicated back to that other person who's trying to communicate to me. So when you say listening, I know this sounds like the simplest thing. When we talk about listening, it should seem obvious. I don't think it's so obvious. What are some things that you do to communicate that you're actively listening?
So I do the things that you mentioned, and then maybe two other things stick out. I'm a calendar driven person, so I make time with one-on-ones and skip levels to give those times for listening, right? And they're not doing a report out to me. They're not updating me on their work or whatever. They can use it for whatever they want, right? So I use those times. They're carved out, and I do my best to stick to those timings. And I also take notes. So that later I can ask them how is your 3-year-old now 4-year-old doing? Like those little specifics of those moments to keep, because I can't remember everything, right? Nobody can, right? So I keep myself some notes so that I can make sure I've got that connection more solid.
Ben, Emory, thoughts?
What comes up for me is I read this book, Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. And it talks about being in the box versus being out of the box, which is an interesting metaphor. But in the box, you treat people like tools or objects of performance. And out of the box, humans are humans. So even when you're going through, if you can imagine somebody in the box saying, hey, don't let me down again, but it's really for them, they're kind of in the box in their own self-deception, right? It's so that they don't look bad. Like, don't let me down so I don't look bad, then the message is always going to fall flat. But if it's, hey, don't let me down again because I really care about you and I want to continue like accomplishing great things with you. If it's coming from, hey, I understand you're human and you have challenges or whatever, but we still need to succeed together. That, like, you could say the same message, but coming from that motivation where you're acknowledging them. And we can only do that introspectively. We can only know. So I love what Kara was saying about maintaining the one-on-ones and treating people as people, because then when hard things need to happen, like, hey, I need to reskill, like we need to work together so that you have the skills to succeed going forward. It's coming from a place of care, not a place of, so that I can so that I can meet, what I need to meet. And we even do that as parents, right? Our kids can sometimes become objects of performance, and really we just want them to behave or be quiet, or not coming from that place of like caring for them as humans. It's very easy to do, and we have to continuously like check in with that as leaders.
100%. And I'm a big fan of everything that both of you have said. And I think, adjusting a mindset, there's been a lot of talk about servant leadership and what that really means. It's almost become a buzzword. But when you think about, your mindset should be inputs and not outputs. You're not there to tell someone how they should feel about something, and you're not closer to the data. Frankly, you're not on, always on the front lines of things. Even if you're whatever level you're at an organization, you're going to have to work collaboratively to be on. So I think everybody can adopt that mindset of, I just want to learn about the other person. I've often heard the phrase, don't get too close to your team, but I kind of have seen the opposite in my experience of just actually being friends with the people that you work. What is a friend in a corporate sense? A friend is someone you can trust. Friend is someone who's got your back. Friend is somebody who's going to be open and give you feedback. And I think that collaboration, when you have a bunch of people that respect each other and get along in a certain degree, you have better outcomes. You have better collaboration. So I think back to your question, Garrett, like for me, listening is not only showing you care and that you heard, I mean, and that is very important, but giving them something to react to. Hey, here's what we're going to do. And we heard these following key themes, and then here's the action that we're going to take on that, and show kind of that you are going to do something about it too.
No, I like that. That's a good answer. Those are all really good answers about listening. And I know, like I said, I know that sounds like a really silly question, but I do think when it comes to people who are listening to this and are watching this, active listening, I've seen take wildly different, solutions to what they think active listening is. And so I think being very transparent and clear about that and explicit about that is critical. Ben, you brought up a couple really good points that I wanted to come circle back to because I think they're really critical. You mentioned creating time to develop themselves and like carving that out for your people. So you have a Udemy account for everybody. I mean, Emory with your team, Carr with your team, I would imagine you've got time for development as well. But so often what I see happening is it's so easy to get in the tactical firefighting mode. And the stresses that like the CEO puts onto their fellow C-suite members, which those C-suite members put onto their fellow VPs, and those VPs put on their fellow directors, and those directors put on their fellow managers, and those managers put on their fellow individual contributors. Ultimately, it's like a domino effect of stress. How do you go about taking giving them the grace to go out and develop themselves? Because so often I'll see scenarios where people are like, yeah, I'd love to do a Udemy class. Please point out a point on my calendar where I will have the time to do that because right now my calendar is booked from 8 a.m. till 7 p.m. No breaks in between. I'm not doing this on the weekends and I'm not doing this at night. So you tell me when I'm going to be able to do this stuff. That's something that I think is not talked about enough is how do we create a culture of giving people the grace to make sure that they get it done? Because one note on it, I'll see often a lot of times managers saying like, oh yeah, I totally support that. As long as you get your normal quota done, or your normal quota of whatever thing's done, you're good. Yeah, go ahead and do your leadership development. It's like, well, hold on a second. We need to readjust our expectations here. If they're going to carve out time to do this, that means their quota of whatever needs to be reduced so then they've got the time to do it. How do you go about setting and managing those expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely sit more on the pressure side of that equation than like work still needs to be done, and we want you to make this investment in yourself. And so there is some partnering. I do think it's a failure of leadership to assume that people are going to get that capacity instantly. So I want to plan with the capacity that I already have, not like hope is not a strategy. Like I hope they, spend their nights and weekends taking these Udemy courses so they can succeed at this thing I'm about to drop them into. So we do have to, as leaders, we have to plan accordingly, and we have to be honest about the capacity that folks are able to demonstrate today. But I definitely think in our culture we have this like thing about extending yourself a little bit for a short time, not for forever, but for a short time to increase your capacity so you can do more with even like what is the one thing I could do this week to make my life easier next week. That might be taking a Udemy course and saying, hey, today's the day. I mean, the rest of the team's going to have to cover for me because today's the day. I need to knock this thing out because I need next week to be better. And, I'm a firm believer in like the most stressful thing is the imposter syndrome. So accepting a couple weeks of challenge to overcome the weight of imposter syndrome is, can feel really amazing. So I do sit a little bit on the pressure side, like compress that time and, okay, what do you need like this week to make that happen? Not letting it like linger about this debate about like, when am I going to get the time? Because as people, we make time. Time comes from us. And so we do have to take that responsibility to make the time for these things.
I like that description, Benjamin. What can I do to make next week better? And I think that like the world is changing and how we learn. Like if you think back to how would I have learned how to do X or Y that I could learn on Udemy today 15 years ago? It would have been through mentoring or a library book or a magazine or a conference, like real time takers. Like those take a whole bunch more time than a Udemy class. Right? And the way, like I have young adult children, the way that they learn something now, they are hopping out of YouTube, they're hopping out on the Udemy and the Udemy equivalent and learning by doing. And the toolbox is just grows so quickly, and it's threaded throughout your work. It's not as much carving time out as little pockets of time to make your next week better.
Yeah. Well, and I can look at myself if I have all these pressures of my sales pipeline or what have you. I could say I don't have time, or I could really look at where is my time going. Did I spend 30 minutes watching a show? Did I spend a couple hours watching a movie? Is that something at least this week I could have exchanged for a better next week? And so I'd look at myself in that way. And so there is some expectation that my teammates would also understand what's needed and make some of those trade-off decisions, at least temporarily, to be more equipped to feel confident in the work they're doing. Because again, I want to empower them to overcome that imposter syndrome, like that discomfort of doing something you're not equipped to do.
I just want to applaud you, Ben, for saying, I'm leaning towards the pressure more. I think it's a good self-awareness, right? Of how all these things can come to people, and we don't always have the ability to prioritize. Going back to what Garrett was saying earlier, that it's not always up to us to say, yes, I can do this, no, I can't do this, or some things that just need to get done. And also like what Kara said about learning by doing. I think at Geomagical Labs, we're not a huge company, and people have to wear many hats, many sweaters, many pants, many, we have to do a lot of things, and we've got to get things done. And our learning experiences, I think we're on a learning journey ourselves about how we tackle this issue, Garrett, because I would love to say that we do a great job of always prioritizing that learning time. And then sometimes things fall by the wayside. But what we do a great job of are trusting that people will get stretch experiences. and that you will learn from experiential learning, and that we're going to give you something really tough to do and you figure out with you and your team. So we do a lot of hackathons. We get people together in the same room and brainstorming and workshops. And I think that emphasizes the fun quotient too for a distributed workforce. It's great to just get people together. And I see a lot of good coming out of that too.
Great.
All right. So I got to call out here because I'm genuinely intrigued. Obviously, Ben, coming from your perspective, you're the CEO of your company. So I think like sometimes when it comes to the things that you're sharing, it's easier for you to say this because you are like the top of your organization's, hierarchy. And oftentimes I'll see very charismatic CEOs say things that about like, oh, the things that we're trying to do culturally or organizationally. But when it comes to actual practical application, it doesn't actually hit and doesn't actually meet, it doesn't actually doesn't actually meet reality, if that makes any sense. And so what I'd be curious to know is how do we go about transcending these leadership traits, these leadership goals, these things that we're trying to achieve organizationally, things like how do we proactively career plan for our people, not just from the CEO to my executive team, but from the vice presidents to their directors, directors to individual contributors, so on and so forth throughout the organization. How do we keep that leadership mentality throughout the entire organization? Do you have incentives put in place that incentivize those behaviors? Like, how do you go about ensuring that those core leadership, like quintessential characteristics and things that you want to embed into the culture of the organization truly are being embodied by your leaders when you're not there?
I mean, that's a great question. We have like a practical way of doing it. I guess I'm really involved in those conversations. So we use a tool called 15.5 where we're running digital one-on-ones. We're a distributed workforce, so we have no physical office anywhere in the world. So we've taken on some digital tools like 15.5 to really see that one-on-ones are happening and to track it. Whatever you track will improve. And so we're tracking at least at the interaction level, the employee engagement level, like what's going down. And then like as conflict occurs, I love guiding those, and we've created some playbooks on how we're going to deal with conflict and how we're going to do that thing. I don't think there's an easy answer, but there's one thing I do micromanage, and that's the culture. So micromanaging the culture is really important to me, and how people interact, and then how they apply the core values to those interactions, how people maintain ownership. Like the scenario you mentioned where somebody's just saying, I don't have time. We've talked a lot about that with Ambition in Motion events. And I think it's nice to say, well, I'll give you time. I can't give you time. Time is your responsibility. And so just making sure that I'm kind, like I care about you as a person, but I'm not going to nicely accommodate your feelings in this particular moment. I'm going to be a straight shooter with you. And then just making sure that that the leaders in the organization understand that their responsibility is to empower their folks to take responsibility for their own careers and their own behavior and their own actions. So we say, we're not nice, but we're kind, quite a bit. And so, no, can I make sure that I know what's happening in those one-on-ones? I can get a general sense of that idea through our people management practices. But I also know that the organization needs to be a life of its own, and I can't, nor do I really want to control every interaction.
That's interesting. I'd be curious to know, Emory or Kara and Ben, if you found that whether that be maybe specific incentives or so Ben, you talk about like measuring, if you measure something, it's going to come out. So maybe it's specific incentives, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's key metrics, maybe it's demonstrating, maybe it's looking for certain characteristics in the hiring process. Like, how do you go about doing that? Because no one wants to hire a bad manager, and no one's intention. My bold statement is I don't think anybody is intentionally a bad manager, but I think we could all raise our hand and think about a time in our life where we had a bad boss. They weren't trying to be bad. They weren't trying to ruin our lives. They weren't trying to be a jerk, but they were, and we face that wrath. And so I guess the point I'm getting at is how can we take some of these core leadership traits and characteristics and either upskill our current managers or look for them in the hiring process to ensure that the leaders we are bringing on board have those traits and can embody those key characteristics?
I'm kind of answering your question with this answer. I would say that all of the positive things that we've been listing are, and I'm the most optimistic person, most optimistic manager, leader you'll ever meet. I'm super optimistic. All those positive things are critical. But one of the best things that can actually make your team align is by getting rid of a bad apple. If you have someone who is not demonstrating that culture, is not doing personal development, is making your life miserable, like I mean, when that person is gone, the rest of the team relaxes. They respond. They see the vision. They appreciate that the difficult choice you made to make that happen. And so sometimes a negative, removing a negative, is as good as all of those positives.
Totally agree.
A great thought. And I think we've probably all been in situations where that thought has become a reality. And I'm really intrigued. I just want to react a little bit to Ben's point about micromanaging culture. Because for me, I would love to be in that stance, I think, a little more of, hey, we have these values that we've articulated over time that are really great and I think really represent who we are. And so there's kind of this bottom up, the culture is what it is, and we can't shape too much of it or smother it or anything like that. And then there's also the top down approach where it's like we have to embody those things and constantly be checking ourselves. And so I wonder, how this is more a question for Ben than answering Garrett's question, but how, when you are thinking about making a good positive culture and maximizing potential, et cetera, like, does it ever come to a point where the micromanaging, or maybe a better way to put it is, have you ever been called out to say, hey, you're kind of meddling here, or like there's too much of a top-down approach, or do you find ways to be like, no, this is good for the company, and I want to learn from how you're doing it?
Yeah, so I'll be super practical just for a quick moment. So the way that I do that is I create an experience, a once a month experience. I first do and what I mean by an experience, just to be again, super practical, is I create an agenda that's intended to be a 90-minute meeting. And sometimes by using screen sharing, I even give people music where they can journal. And I kind of control the meeting in an experience. And I do it with the squad. Like we've broken everybody up into squads, and I do it with the squad leaders first, which teaches them how to go do it with their team. And one of our core values is empowering. So what I'm not going to do is squad leader comes to me with a problem or is uncomfortable with the exercise, and I'm going to go do it for them. But yeah, they've responded really well to this content creation about these certain things that we want to teach about culture. And then they've also responded to me showing them how they could lead an experience. And someday I'll take all those experiences and I'll package them up and I'll offer them to the world. But that has been a way that I've micromanaged the culture, to really take focused time to create content and to create these 90-minute experiences. I don't even call them meetings, because they really are like, we ask specific questions, we ask everyone to respond, basically in the same way like a mastermind forum would be conducted. And I'm really enjoying it. I love doing it, and I think the team's responding really well.
That's great. I can't help but think about every company is going to struggle with how do we align business objectives, get things done from a people lens, maximize team potential, then how are we tracking this along the way? And I think, performance and development wise, we're trying to go from a posture of, hey, once a year we're going to sit down and tell you some things that you can improve on, and here are your goals and development commitments we'll make, et cetera. We really want to be more continuous feedback driven, and I think that's so trusting. If somebody gives you a piece of feedback, they're being not only vulnerable and authentic, but they're giving you a gift. And I think recognizing that and saying, whoa, yeah, I did act strange in that meeting, or I did, kind of come off a certain way in the client call. I don't know if that answers your question, Garrett, a little bit, but I think continuous feedback is the way. I love it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's a good response. I think it goes back to the original point we brought up before with Kara of just making feedback less scary or making any transition less scary, which is creating an environment of psychological safety and trust. Because the feedback you're probably describing is from a direct report up to their boss. Because ultimately, the boss isn't likely micromanaging or seeing how their direct report, who's also a middle manager themselves, is leading and having the one-on-ones with their respective teams. And so therefore, if they're not privy to those interactions, it's the direct report who needs to feel the comfort and the safety and the security to say, hey, this feedback session was not helpful. And this, the way that you're delivering this to me is not inspiring change or action. It's just inspiring frustration that I'm having with you. Or, hey, this was a really great feedback session. I'm now going to rectify my actions and, I now know what I need to do. Or, hey, waiting 8 months to tell me that the way I've been doing this thing is not the right way is probably not a great idea. I wish you would have told me immediately so then I didn't develop these bad habits that I'm not doing it the wrong way. And I've been doing it the wrong way for months.
So Garrett, I've got a question for the group.
Yeah.
I currently work for a company who is primarily in the office. Everything we've talked about today has been very relevant to my team's work in the office. Is there anything different we would say for folks that are not in the office? Right? I've had the last 2 years, I've forgotten what remote work is like. I'm only thinking about in-office work. And so I'm wondering, do we help teams maximize their potential differently if they're not in office?
We're 100% remote, so we have to track engagement, and we have to have some way of, because folks will. I feel like the physical location forces people together. There's water cooler conversation. There's all kinds of things that we take for granted. And so, one of the Clifton Strengths 20 questions is like, do you have a friend at work? And we started looking at those and just going like, man, these scores are getting worse and worse based on this remote working environment. And that's why we created the squads concept. So the squads concept is people outside of their client circle. So you have your concentric circle of client delivery, and then, or, kind of like your work team. And then you have this other concentric circle, which is your squad, your bros, your buddies. And so to bring them together for 90 minutes a month. And then now one squad is responsible for this quarter's social engagement. So whether they want to have a virtual happy hour or a game, I'll play imposter or something together, like that's up for that squad to organize. So we have had to take a different approach to socialization within the workplace because the physical location is not doing that. And then when I want to do an all hands, like if I wanted to have an in-person all hands, I mean, that cost tens of thousands of dollars because everyone is everywhere. But I also see that on like sales and customer interaction. You want to bring people together in person. It's become a pretty major event. So rather than saying, hey, when can I come pitch your team in the office? We've said, hey, when are you doing your corporate gathering already, and we'll sponsor a happy hour, or we'll buy a dinner. and trying to attach to their already planned gathering and just maximize it. And so I think you'll continue to see at least the remote companies determine a gathering calendar, and just because I don't necessarily think I'm that uncommon in the sense that people are more open to remote work and more distributed.
Yes. I mean, I don't think that you can apply the same methods to in-office than remote or distributed work. This is something we think about a lot, creating culture where you don't have, always people meeting in the same physical co-location. And when I think about how it's different, two words come to mind: vigilance and creativity. Get creative with things that are outside of work. If every time you're meeting with me and the first thing out of your mouth is, okay, so how's the project going? Or where are deliverables right now? I'm not going to be as motivated. I'm not going to connect with you as a human being. What we're doing right now is so important. And some of those deeper conversations need a place to live. So being creative there, and then more vigilant check-ins. And sometimes it's as simple as, how are you? But then waiting maybe 5 seconds and be like, okay, but how are you really? And so I think the combination of knowing that it is a different thing being distributed than in office, that you can't put the genie back in a bottle, where remote work is here to stay, and for good reasons, I think. But that would be how I would answer your question, Cara.
Cool. Well, Emory, Ben, Cara, this has been a great pre-symposium panel. I feel like we've covered a ton of ground during this this recording today. Thanks for being here. And if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I'd love to meet these three great leaders, come to the Executive Symposium. It'll be tomorrow, Thursday, October 17th in Houston, Texas, on the topic, how to maximize our